She offered herself to warm her daughter in the tent, but the human warmed them both with snow drifted in sheets across the Aurora Shield, sliding down the curved glass of Kyrian Ridge habitat. The outpost was built to endure efficient, sterile, a cluster of research modules pressed into the side of a glacial valley. Inside, white light hummed above clean corridors. Outside, just beyond the security line, a camp of discarded workers clung to life under patched tents and sputtering heaters. Darren Cole had been on assignment here for 6 months. Officially, he cataloged weather buoys and maintained the ridge's climate sensors. Unofficially, he kept to himself. He had served in the Federation Recon Corps years ago. Now he wanted silence, routine, and distance from command structures that had stopped feeling human. Kyrian Ridge gave him all three, until the camp outside began to grow. He'd seen it expand each week. Migrants, laid-off contractors, families without clearance to stay inside the habitat. The administration ignored them. Darren couldn't. When he checked external weather relays, he saw the camp's heaters flicker red too often. Tonight, one of those red signals pulsed again, a tent losing power as the temperature dropped to -30. He trudged through the snow with a crate of spare Reagan cells. His boots crunched over the frozen ground. His breath fogged in front of his face. He didn't plan to get involved beyond a quick fix. But when he pulled open the tent flap, he froze. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. A woman knelt by a small child wrapped in a threadbare blanket. The woman's skin was a faint blue with a pale luminescent tone, the kind seen in Irene hybrids. Her long white hair hung damp against her shoulders, and her sash, a woven heat-trap fabric, clung to her frame, darkened with melted frost. She pressed her hands around the child's small chest, trying to share warmth through touch alone. "Reagan cell's dead," she said, voice low but firm. "We can't enter the ward without payment." Her eyes flicked toward him, assessing rather than pleading. "If you bring heat, I can warm you. That's the trade." Darren stood still for a beat. He saw exhaustion in her face, not weakness, but the tight look of someone who had stopped expecting kindness. He set the crate down. "Keep her against your skin," he said. "I'll get the cell running." He knelt by the panel, snapped open the casing, and replaced the dead cell with a new one. The fabric walls began to hum, then glowed faint amber. The air softened. He turned back to her. "She'll warm up fast." The woman adjusted the blanket over the child, her movements mechanical, precise. Her lips parted as if to thank him, but she hesitated. "Debt is debt," she said instead. "Name it." "Dinner," he said. "You, your daughter, and me." Her brow creased. "That's not a debt." "Then call it routine maintenance." For a moment, she stared, trying to gauge his intent. Then her shoulders dropped slightly, tension breaking. "I'm Aurea," she said. "My daughter's Sora." Darren nodded once. "Darren Cole, Weather Division." Sora stirred at his voice, a small movement, but alive. Her skin tone was lighter than her mother's, more translucent around the eyes. She reached for the edge of his cloak, gripping it weakly. The gesture hit him harder than he expected. He remembered the cold of an evacuation bay on Healer Station, a little girl he hadn't been able to save. He swallowed and looked away, forcing that image down where it lived. "You've been here long?" he asked. 3 weeks, Aurea said. "We came from the trade route collapse on Narrated 4. My work permit was voided when the lab shut down." "Science background?" "Bioanalysis." She nodded once, pride beneath exhaustion. "I cleaned the Ridge's water filters once. Then they hired cheaper machines." Darren could hear the heater stabilizing. He glanced around the tent. Thin insulation, broken stitching near the port. He checked the seam with his thumb. "You'll need a new liner." Aurea gave a short laugh. "We'll need many things." He didn't smile back. "You'll get the liner." He reached into his pack and pulled out a folded thermal sheet, taped it along the corner. Sora followed his movements, silent, eyes wide. The child had that alert stillness that came from long hunger and fear. Darren adjusted the final strip and stood. "You shouldn't be out here," he said quietly. "Camp's on unstable ground. If a storm hits, this tent won't hold." "We weren't invited inside," Aurea replied. "People like us never are." He paused, wanting to say something, Anything that didn't sound like pity. Tomorrow, he said instead. I'll bring a new cell and hot food. Her eyes narrowed. Why? Because you need it, he said simply. And because I can. She didn't thank him. She didn't smile. But her hand shifted slightly toward the heater, a small act of trust. As Darren stepped out, the cold slammed back into him. The sky above the ridge pulsed faint green under the Aurora field. He walked the narrow path toward the main habitat gate, thinking about the look in Aurea's eyes. Not gratitude, but calculation. She had weighed him the way a survivor measures risk. He liked that. It meant she hadn't given up. He was halfway to the checkpoint when he stopped and looked back. The tent's faint orange glow stood out against the snow. The hum of the cell inside was steady now. For the first time in months, the outpost didn't feel completely dead. Back in his small quarters, Darren poured a cup of Furlan Seed coffee and sat at his desk. He wrote a note to requisition extra heater panels. He knew administration would reject it. He wrote it anyway. Then he turned on the map feed. The outer camp showed 23 heat signatures, all faint. He marked Aurea's tent with a silent tag, not as an assignment, but as something personal. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. He'd come here to be invisible, to forget the part of him that kept stepping into other people's problems. Yet tonight, standing in that freezing tent, something had shifted. He didn't plan to fix everything, but he couldn't walk past them again. Outside, the wind rose across the ridge, dragging snow over the domes. The tent lights flickered once, then steadied. Darren watched the screen until the signal stayed green. Then he let himself breathe. Morning came slow, gray, and quiet across the ridge. Thin sunlight passed through the Aurora shield, glinting off the frost that coated the camp. Darren's boots sank deep into powder as he crossed the open yard, a steaming kettle clutched in one gloved hand and a canvas bag in the other. The smell of Furlan Seed coffee mixed with a metallic bite of cold air. He had slept little, his mind running circles around the image of Aurea kneeling in the dim tent, her hands shaking as she shielded her daughter from the cold. He hadn't meant to get involved. He was supposed to file data reports, maintain buoy calibrations, and stay clear of refugee matters. That was the unspoken rule at Kyrian Ridge Habitat. Stay in your lane, don't see too much. But as he passed the perimeter fence and saw the smoke from the camp's cook fires, he already knew he would break that rule again. The tent looked better in daylight. Patched seams, a steady glow from the heater he'd fixed. Aurea was crouched outside, rinsing metal cups with snowmelt. Her long white hair caught the light and almost looked silver. The color of her skin, a muted blue with faint undertones of gray, seemed softer now that warmth had returned. She looked up as he approached, but didn't smile. Her eyes studied him first, sharp and cautious. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," he replied. He set the bag down, knelt, and opened it. Steam rose as he unpacked small, wrapped portions of food. Zyron flatbread, dried tubers, and coffee. Sora poked her head from inside the tent, her eyes sleepy, her small face marked with the pale spots typical of Orenyi children. She blinked at him, then at the food, and ducked back inside. Aurea followed her with a glance that was both fond and wary. "Most people say they'll come back," Aurea said. "They don't. I'm not most people," Darren said, and poured coffee into one of the rinsed cups. He handed it over, waiting while she took a cautious sip. Aurea exhaled, surprised. "You didn't water it down. I drink it strong." "So do I." Her voice softened, the first small crack in her guarded tone. Inside the tent, Sora shuffled forward, tugging at her mother's wrap. Darren noticed the way Aurea bent immediately, balancing dignity and tenderness, always between strength and fear. The child leaned against her leg, hiding half her face behind the fabric. "She's shy," Aurea said, smoothing the girl's hair. "She doesn't talk much to strangers." "I used to be the same," Darren said. "It gets easier when people stop being strangers." Sora looked at him, unsure if that was a joke. Darren reached into his coat and pulled out a small glow insect capsule, one of the harmless biolights the maintenance drones use for night inspection. He twisted it open, and a soft green shimmer filled the space. Sora's expression changed instantly. She reached for the light, eyes wide. "It's safe," Darren said. "They use these in the vents to scare off frost mites." Sora held the glow carefully between her palms. Her small smile appeared, brief but real. Aurea watched that moment, the faint light reflecting in her eyes. For the first time, her shoulders eased. "You talk to children like you've had one," she said quietly. Darren's jaw tightened. He didn't look away, but his answer came slow. "I used to know one. Long time ago." He set another cup of coffee down for her and changed the subject. "The storm last night hit hard. You're lucky the tent didn't fold." She nodded. "Luck had nothing to do with it. You fixed it before it broke." He studied her face, steady, unreadable, tired. "What were you doing before the trade route collapsed?" "I worked in the Let Hari research division. Water purification systems." She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup for warmth. "I designed things to make colonies livable. And then one day, they said we were too expensive. Machines could replace us. That's how I ended up here too," Darren said. "Except I replaced myself." Her head tilted slightly. "You left the military?" "After a collapse on Healer Station. A dozen people died under orders that made no sense. I stopped following orders after that. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was measured. Two people comparing scars without needing details. Wind cut through the camp, sharp and clean. From the ridge above, one of the habitat's survey drones buzzed low, scanning the perimeter. Aurea's hand twitched towards Sora instinctively. Darren watched the motion, then reached over to the tent flap and adjusted it to block the line of sight. "They don't scan this low," he said. "Just routine surveillance." "You trust them too much," she said. "I trust patterns, not people." She glanced at him, assessing again. The corner of her mouth twitched, half a smile, maybe. "You sound like someone who's been disappointed often." "I've earned it," he said simply. They ate quietly after that. The sound of wind against the tent filled the space between words. Sora counted each sip of coffee, whispering numbers in a language Darren didn't recognize. It reminded him of field medics whispering countdowns during surgery, measured, precise, trying to stay calm. When they finished, Aurea cleaned the cups again, pouring melted snow to rinse them. "You're wasting good warmth," Darren said. "It's habit," she answered. "Clean things don't spread sickness." He nodded. She worked like someone used a structure, not chaos. Even her movements had a rhythm, efficient, deliberate, built from years of surviving systems that broke around her. He checked the Regan cell again and saw it running low. "I'll bring another before night," he said. "You don't need to." "I do. You have a child." Aurea straightened, crossing her arms, her eyes narrow now. "We don't need charity." "It's not charity. It's maintenance." The firmness in his tone made her pause. She saw something in his expression that stopped her next argument. The quiet, unflinching certainty of someone who had already made up his mind. "Why are you doing this, Darren?" she asked, voice low. "You don't owe us anything. We're not your mission." He met her eyes. "I've had missions. They ended in funerals. This," he gestured around the tent. "This feels more like purpose." She didn't answer, but her gaze softened just enough to show she'd heard him. As he packed up, Sora tugged at his sleeve again, holding up the glow capsule. "Keep it," he said. "You can count lights instead of seconds tonight." Aurea glanced at the gift, hesitated, then nodded. "We'll keep it safe." Darren stepped outside, pulling his hood up as snow began to fall again. The camp stretched before him, silent and raw under the bright, sterile sky. He looked back once. Inside the tent, he saw Aurea adjusting the heater, her movements sure and calm now. The child's laughter reached him faintly, small, fragile, alive. Walking back toward the ridge, Darren realized something had shifted inside him overnight. He wasn't just fixing equipment anymore. He was watching two lives, cold, fading, almost invisible, and realizing he couldn't stand by while they slipped away. He thought about the officers back inside the habitat, how they talked about the camp as a containment problem. He wondered what they would call it if they saw the look in that woman's eyes when she held her daughter close. Probably something clinical, something without weight. By the time he reached the main gate, his decision was already made. He would keep them alive through the season, quietly, without orders, without permission. As he signed back through security, The guard nodded without interest. Cold out there. Getting warmer, Darren said. He didn't explain why. Snow had thickened by the third day, layering the camp in silence. The wind came down from the ridge like a living thing, rattling the lines between tents. Darren walked the path again, his coat stiff with frost, carrying a new Regan cell and a pack of food supplies wrapped in thermal cloth. The guard at the checkpoint didn't stop him anymore. He signed the log, nodded once, and crossed into the camp without looking back. He told himself this was temporary, just until the worst of the weather passed. But deep down, he already knew better. Every time he stepped into that field of canvas shelters, he felt the sterile hum of the outpost fade behind him. Out here, things were raw, human, unfiltered. Inside the walls, it was all procedure and silence. Aurea's tent was easy to spot now. Repaired seams, a faint curl of steam from the heater vent, a child's small footprints outside. He crouched and tapped on the flap once before entering. Inside, it was warm, not comfortable, but survivable. Aurea sat cross-legged on the ground, her long white hair pulled into a loose braid, her hands stitching an old piece of thermal fabric into something that might pass for a blanket. Sora slept nearby, bundled under Darren's old cloak. "You're early," Aurea said without looking up. "Had a free hour. Figured I'd make it useful." He set the supplies down, checked the Regan cell on the wall, and swapped the new one in. This one should last the week. She tied off her stitching and looked up. "You always say that like you're explaining an operation." "Old habit," he said. "I don't like surprises." Her gaze lingered. "That's how soldiers talk." He hesitated before answering. "It's how survivors talk." Sora stirred then, half awake, small and blinking. Her eyes landed on Darren, and she smiled faintly. "You came back," she murmured. He nodded. "Brought breakfast this time." The smell of the food filled the tent quickly. Tuber mash, flatbread, a pinch of honey gel. Aurea portioned it with quiet precision, giving Sora the larger share before taking her own. Darren sat by the entrance, eating from the corner of his plate, his attention flicking between the tent seams, the heater, the camp outside. It was instinct. His eyes never stopped checking exits, temperature, shadows. Sora's voice broke through the hum of the heater. "You don't live in the big building." Darren looked at her. "The habitat? I live in one of the lower dorms. Not the nice ones." "Why?" she asked. "You help people." He smiled a little. "Helping people doesn't make you popular." Aurea's head turned at that. She watched him quietly, as if measuring the truth in his tone. "You don't talk like an officer," she said. "But you move like one." Was one, he admitted. Not anymore. Her expression softened for the first time since they met. "What happened?" He hesitated. It wasn't something he talked about, but something in her tone, not pity, just curiosity, made it easier to say. "Healer station. I followed an order that got civilians killed. When the dust settled, I was the only one who wrote the report. After that, I walked away." Aurea said nothing for a long moment. "Then, and they let you go. They didn't have a reason to keep me. I wasn't dangerous, just done." She nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. "You think saving one child here will balance that weight?" Her words weren't cruel, they were honest. He met her gaze without flinching. "No, but it's something." Outside, the wind howled through the camp, shaking the poles. Darren stood, checking the lines, and secured the tent door with a small clamp. When he turned back, Aurea was watching him again, her expression unreadable. "You fix things because you can't fix yourself," she said quietly. He didn't deny it. "Maybe, but people still stay warm." That made her smile just slightly. It was the first real one he'd seen. "You're strange, Darren Cole. I get that a lot." Sora laughed softly and crawled into her mother's lap, still holding the glow capsule he'd given her. She pressed the light to her chest, watching it flicker. "Mama says when people help, it's because they need to be seen." Darren looked at the little girl. "Your mother's smart. She's lonely," Sora replied without hesitation. Aurea froze for half a second, startled by the bluntness. "Sora," she warned gently. "It's fine," Darren said, his tone calm. "She's not wrong." He turned to Aurea. "Most people out here are lonely, even the ones behind the walls." The silence that followed was not cold. It was quiet understanding, the kind that settled between people who'd run out of ways to lie to themselves. After breakfast, Darren began clearing a spot near the heater. He pulled a small folding kit from his pack and started assembling a new support frame. Metal struts, recycled bolts, a thin insulation sheet. Aurea watched with curiosity. "What are you building?" "A heat baffle," he said. "It'll trap warmth lower to the ground. Sora shouldn't have to sleep against the wall." "You act like this is a field station," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "It is now." For the next hour, they worked side by side, him with his tools, her mending the edges of fabric to fit the frame. Their movements found rhythm, a silent coordination that didn't need words. Sora sat nearby, humming to herself, arranging small rocks into a pattern only she understood. When the job was done, Darren straightened and wiped his hands on his trousers. The air inside the tent was noticeably warmer. "Not bad," he said. Aurea leaned close to the baffle, testing the heat. "It feels different, softer. Even warmth needs direction," he said. Her eyes flicked up to his. "That sounds like something a commander would say." He gave a half smile. "Maybe, but it's true." As he packed his tools, a voice called from outside. Sharp, officious, human. "Maintenance unit. Identify yourself." Darren stiffened. The outpost security patrols rarely came this far down. He pushed the flap aside and stepped out. A pair of habitat workers stood in the snow, their white coats spotless, their faces half hidden behind masks. "This sector isn't approved for employee interaction," one of them said. "You're out of bounds." Darren met the man's eyes. "Environmental inspection. Checking heat distribution." The worker hesitated. Darren's tone was flat, confident, practiced. After a pause, the man nodded stiffly. "Log your data at the gate next time." "I will." The two turned and walked off, their boots leaving perfect, even tracks in the snow. Darren watched until they vanished into the ridge fog. When he ducked back inside, Aurea was standing close to the entrance, holding Sora tight. "What do they want?" "Nothing serious," he said. "They just like reminding people who's in charge." "They'll report you," she said quietly. "Let them. I'm just a man fixing weather sensors." She shook her head. "You're not just that." He didn't answer. He checked the heater again, then crouched near Sora. "You're safe. That's what matters." The girl nodded sleepily, curling into the warmth. Aurea sat down across from him, her eyes steady. "You could walk away. No one would stop you." "I know," he said, "but you won't." "No." Her voice softened. "You don't even know us." "I know enough," he said simply. The heater hummed between them. Outside, the patrol's tracks were already disappearing under fresh snow. Inside, the small dome of heat pulsed with steady light, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Aurea let her hands fall to her sides, no longer braced for collapse. Darren sat back, feeling something shift in the quiet. Not safety, not yet, but a fragile balance that might hold if they didn't breathe too hard. He glanced at her once more, at the way her braid fell over her shoulder, at the exhaustion that still sat behind her eyes, and he knew that whatever had started as duty was becoming something else entirely. He didn't name it. He didn't have to. The look she gave him said she already knew. By the fourth day, the ridge winds had grown harsher, cutting through the outer camp like a warning. Kyrian Ridge habitat continued its sterile hum in the distance, glowing faint blue under the Aurora dome. But the camp outside looked stripped and exposed. Fabric shelters shaking under gusts, steam pipes freezing over, people clinging to what warmth they had left. Darren made his way through the snow before dawn, his coat drawn tight, breath burning in the cold. He had brought more than just a Regan cell this time. 2 spare heat panels, a small metal pot, and something he hadn't carried in months, a weapon. The security patrol from the previous day hadn't reported him yet, but he knew better than to believe they'd forget. They never forgot anything that broke protocol. When he reached Aurea's tent, the flap was half open. Heat leaked faintly from within. He crouched, peered inside, and saw her awake already, sitting beside the heater with a piece of wire in her hand, fixing one of Sora's broken toys, a tiny glass figure she'd made from melted fragments of lab equipment. The toy caught the heater's light, glowing faintly green. "You don't sleep much," Darren said as he entered, brushing frost from his shoulders. I used to sleep, Aurea replied. Then I learned not to waste time dreaming. Dreaming's the only thing keeping most people here alive, he said quietly. She looked at him for a moment, then down at the toy. Maybe for you. I have a child. She's the only thing I need to keep alive. He didn't argue. He unpacked the heat panels, setting them beside the wall. The small dome of light inside the tent made her skin appear almost silver blue, the color of ice under shallow water. She'd changed, he could tell. The guarded stiffness in her shoulders had lessened, replaced by a kind of calm that came with exhaustion and acceptance. You brought more, she said, noticing the panels. Wind shifting, he said. You'll need backup heat if the main cell freezes. The ridge weather's unpredictable. We could get a pressure drop in the next 12 hours. You talk like you're still reporting to someone. Maybe I am, he said, half smiling. Old habits die harder than people think. Sora stirred awake, yawning. Her hair, tangled and white as frost, fell into her eyes. When she saw Darren, she smiled quick and bright. You came early, she said. Couldn't sleep, he admitted. Want to make sure your tent didn't fly away. It didn't, she said proudly, holding up the glass toy. Mama fixed my light bug. Darren crouched down. Looks better than new. Sora grinned and offered it to him. You keep it, so you remember. He blinked. Remember what? That you fixed us, she said simply. Aurea's eyes softened, but her voice was careful. Sora, don't give it away. It's the only one you have. Sora shook her head. You can borrow it, until we're warm forever. The words hit Darren harder than they should have. He took the small figure carefully, nodded, and set it in his coat pocket. I'll guard it, he said. Scout's honor. He moved to the tent's outer wall and began mounting the panels, working in silence. Aurea watched him, her hands resting on her knees, her expression unreadable. When he finished, he turned back to her. You ever thought about moving closer to the habitat gate? The air's cleaner there, less wind exposure. They won't let us near, she said flatly. The guards already told us the camp reached its limit. We're at the edge of their tolerance. What if you had someone with clearance? Her eyes narrowed. You'd risk your own position for us? Darren didn't look up from his tools. If I do it quietly, no one will notice. You and Sora could stay in an equipment shelter, off record. You'd lose your job, she said. I've lost worse. Aurea's voice dropped. Why? Why are you doing this? He exhaled, resting his hands against the heater. Because this place, he gestured toward the habitat's glowing skyline, was built by people who forgot what compassion feels like. And I don't want to forget too. She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for the part that was pretending. She didn't find it. The tent's outer fabric rustled sharply, footsteps crunching in the snow. Darren went still, then pulled the flap open just enough to see a figure moving past. A habitat worker in a white coat, scanning tents with a handheld thermal reader. The man paused near Aurea's tent. Darren's hand went instinctively to his jacket, to the holstered weapon hidden under the lining. The worker turned, checked his reader, and frowned. Unauthorized power consumption detected. He muttered, tapping the screen. Aurea froze. Her eyes flicked to Sora, who immediately went silent. Darren stepped outside, his voice calm, steady. That's my reading. I'm testing redundant heat output for field calibration. The worker blinked. Who authorized you? Maintenance Division, Habitat 3, Darren said, holding up a blank ID card like it meant something. If you want to file a complaint, take it up with Officer Heron. The man hesitated, clearly unfamiliar with the name, but unwilling to challenge someone who sounded confident. Just log it, he said finally, lowering the scanner. We're monitoring grid spikes this week. Be careful. I always am, Darren said, and watched him leave. When he ducked back inside, Aurea was pale. He saw the heat signature, she whispered. They'll mark us as unauthorized users. Not if I reroute it through a public line, Darren said. They'll think it's a field test. She shook her head. You're risking too much. So are you, he said evenly. Every time you light that heater. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but the fight drained from her face. She sank down beside Sora and covered her eyes for a moment. I hate this, she said softly. Hiding, pretending we're not worth the air we breathe. Darren crouched beside her. You're worth more than they ever built in that habitat. She looked up at him then, really looked. The blue of her eyes caught the light, glass clear but heavy with exhaustion. You talk like you've seen it all before. I have, he said. Different world. Same cruelty. For a long time, neither spoke. The heater hummed quietly, casting a faint orange glow across their faces. Sora had fallen asleep again, her small hand clutching the edge of Aurea's wrap. Aurea's voice finally broke the silence. If you help us move closer to the gate, would you stay? He hesitated. If you'll have me. I didn't ask to be rescued, she said. I didn't come here to rescue you, he replied. I came to make sure you and Sora don't vanish into another report no one reads. The tent shifted as another gust hit it. The heater flickered but held. Aurea reached out, caught his wrist before he could stand. Her touch was light but firm, grounding him. Darren, she said quietly, I know what happens when people try to care in places like this. The system chews them up. He nodded. Maybe, but I've been chewed up before. Still standing. Something in his tone, calm, unshakable, pulled the last bit of resistance from her. She released his wrist, but her hand lingered just a second longer than necessary. Tomorrow, she said, almost to herself. We'll move tomorrow. He gave a single nod. I'll find you a place. Somewhere dry. Somewhere safe. As he stepped out, the wind caught his coat and filled it like a sail. He looked back once. Aurea had settled beside her daughter, brushing snow from the blanket. The tent glowed softly behind them, fragile light against the dark. Walking back toward the ridge, Darren tightened his grip on the pocket that held Sora's little glass toy. It was still warm from his hand, pulsing faintly with reflected light from the habitat above. For a man who'd spent years avoiding purpose, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. The quiet, unfamiliar weight of belonging to someone again. He knew it would cost him, but as the wind howled down the valley, the thought didn't scare him. Not anymore. The storm hit at dawn. It came without warning, just a low groan across the valley, then a wall of white that swallowed everything. Kyrian Ridge's alarms stayed silent. The outpost didn't register the camp as part of its jurisdiction. It wasn't even on the map. Darren woke to the sound of canvas tearing somewhere down the slope. He was already dressed when the wind hit his cabin doors hard enough to shake the frame. He grabbed his pack, spare heat cells, rope, a small toolkit, and was out the door before the coffee on his counter stopped steaming. He didn't wait for authorization. There wouldn't be any. Outside, visibility was near zero. The Aurora dome above flickered green against the blizzard, light bending and disappearing in the snow haze. He pulled his mask up and moved by memory, following the service path he'd walked every day that week. The cold bit through his gloves, through everything. He thought about Aurea's tent, its seams, its poles, her small hands stitching them at dawn. It wouldn't hold long. By the time he reached the camp, the storm had already taken half of it. Fabric and metal tore across the snow. Someone screamed for help, another voice answering from nowhere. He moved without thinking, securing what tents he could, hammering down the ice stakes that had come loose. Each movement was instinct, sharp and practiced. Then he found their tent. It was half collapsed, the heater still glowing weakly under the snowdrift. He dropped his knees, ripped the flap aside. Inside, Aurea was huddled over Sora, shielding her with her body. The child was crying quietly, her hands pressed to her ears against the noise. Aurea's wrap had come loose. Her hair was soaked and plastered to her face. Darren. Her voice cracked, hoarse from cold. The pole snapped. He was already moving. He planted his shoulder under the sagging line, forcing it up, then grabbed the spare pole from his pack. His breath fogged the air as he worked, knuckles raw and bleeding. The tent rose slowly back into shape, though it shuddered with every gust. Get your things, he said, voice hard. We're not staying here. There's nowhere else, Aurea said. There's a maintenance dome near the ridge. Power grid ties in below the habitat. You'll be safe there. She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the noise outside. It's too far. I'll carry her. Aurea looked at him, searching, deciding, and then nodded once. All right. Darren scooped Sora into his arms, wrapping her in his cloak. The child's eyes fluttered open briefly. "Cold," she whispered. "I know, little one. Hold tight." Aurea grabbed the heater cell and what little food they had left. Then they stepped into the storm. Snow hit them like shards of glass. Visibility dropped to a few meters. Darren led the way, head low, one hand gripping Aurea's wrist so they wouldn't lose each other. Each step was a fight against the wind. The temperature kept dropping. The storm roared so loud it became silence. Only their breathing and the sound of Sora's faint whimper against his chest. Halfway up the slope, Aurea stumbled. Darren stopped instantly, pulling her upright. She was trembling, her lips blue, her eyes unfocused. "Don't stop," he said. "You stop, you freeze." "I can't feel my hands," she said, voice barely audible. He pulled her closer, pressing her hand against his chest under his coat. "You will. Move." For several seconds, they just stood there, leaning into each other, her hand against his heartbeat. Then she nodded once, gathered herself, and pushed forward again. When they finally reached the maintenance dome, Darren kicked Snow from the entry lock and forced the panel open. The interior lights flickered to life, dim yellow, but enough. Warmth hit them like a wall. He set Sora down near the central heater, ripped open his pack, and started feeding the cell into the grid. Aurea sank to her knees, shaking uncontrollably, her hair dripping onto the floor. She tried to help, but her hands wouldn't cooperate. "Sit," Darren ordered. "I'll handle it." "I can. Sit." She froze at the tone, then obeyed. He worked fast, rewiring the heater, checking the vent seals. The sound of a storm outside dulled to a low howl as the dome pressurized. When he was done, he turned and saw Aurea watching him, still trembling, but her eyes steady again. "You look like you've done this before," she said. "Too many times," he answered. Back then, it was soldiers instead of civilians. He crouched by Sora, checking her breathing. The little girl's skin was cold, but her pulse was strong. He covered her with his coat and leaned back. His hand shook slightly as the adrenaline drained out. Aurea's voice came soft. "You could have stayed in your quarters. No one would have blamed you." "I would have blamed me," he said. She stared at him for a long moment. "You keep saying you're not saving us, but that's exactly what you're doing." He looked at her then, his eyes tired but focused. "Maybe I'm saving myself." The heater hummed louder, stabilizing the air temperature. Aurea's breathing slowed. She leaned back against the metal wall, eyes closed. Her hands were still shaking, so Darren knelt beside her, took them gently, and began rubbing warmth into her fingers. She didn't pull away. "You don't have to," she murmured. "I know." "Then why?" He looked at her, really looked. The bruised color of her skin, the chapped lines at the corners of her mouth, the stubborn strength in her expression even now. "Because if I stop caring," he said quietly, "then the people who built this place win." She opened her eyes. For a long time, they just looked at each other, the hum of the heater the only sound. Her breathing steadied. Slowly, she reached up, touching his wrist, the same way she had days ago, when she'd told him she was tired of pretending. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple but heavy. He nodded once. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." But even as he said it, he knew the storm wasn't the only danger. The security patrols would check the maintenance domes when the weather cleared. Unauthorized heat use, unregistered civilians, it would all get flagged. He bought them time, nothing more. Sora shifted in her sleep, mumbling something unintelligible. Aurea glanced down at her daughter and smiled faintly, exhaustion softening her face. Darren stood and checked the door seals again. Outside, the wind screamed across the ridge, but inside, for the first time in days, there was peace. He sat beside them, close enough to share warmth. Aurea leaned her head back against the wall, eyes half closed. Her voice came quiet, almost unsure. "When this ends, what happens to us?" He didn't answer immediately. "Then we find somewhere they can't measure." "Such places don't exist," she said. "They do," he said. "They just don't show up on maps." Her lips curved slightly, somewhere between disbelief and hope. "You sound like someone planning to disappear." "I've done it before," he said. She turned her head, studying him again. the faint glow of the heater reflecting off her blue skin. "You look tired." He gave a short laugh. "I've been tired for years." "Then rest," she whispered. "You've done enough for one day." He didn't argue. The storm outside raged against the dome, but inside, warmth and silence filled the small space. Sora slept between them, her small hand resting on Darren's arm. Aurea's breathing slowed, matching his. When sleep finally came, it wasn't peace. It was something heavier, quieter. The kind of rest that came only after too many nights spent running from conscience. And though the ridge still howled and the habitat above still ignored the camp below, for one fragile night, 3 people existed outside its cold arithmetic. When morning came, the storm was still there, but weaker, gentler. Wind hissed across the dome's curved shell, brushing snow from its seams. Inside, faint sunlight filtered through a small viewport, turning the air a pale gold. Darren woke first. His neck ached from sleeping sitting up, his arms still draped protectively over Sora, who had shifted in her sleep to curl against his side. Aurea was awake too, watching him quietly. Her expression was softer now, no longer guarded. The faint blue tone of her skin glowed faintly in the filtered light, and her long white hair hung loose over her shoulders. She'd found an old blanket in the dome's storage unit and wrapped it around herself and the girl, sitting close enough that Darren could feel the faint warmth of her presence. He rubbed his eyes, listening to the steady hum of the heater. "How long was I out?" 3 hours, Aurea said. "You barely moved. I thought you might have frozen sitting up like that." He gave a tired smile. "Wouldn't be the worst way to go. At least it's quiet." Her tone softened. "You always joke when you're uncomfortable." "Maybe." He shifted, rolling his stiff shoulder. "I just prefer quiet problems to loud ones." Aurea looked toward the small viewport. Beyond it, the ridge was still hidden in swirling fog. "Do you think the storm will stop today?" "Soon," Darren said. "Once the wind shifts east, the pressure will rise. Habitat Control will send drones to clear the camp. They'll see what's left." Her jaw tightened. "You mean they'll see us?" "Yes." He didn't soften it. "They'll scan for unauthorized heat traces. We can't stay here much longer." She pulled the blanket tighter around Sora. "And then what? Go back to the tents?" "No," he said. "We're moving inside the habitat." Aurea's eyes snapped to his. "That's impossible. They'll never allow it. They don't have to know. You think you can hide us inside a research facility?" "I can't," Darren said quietly. For a while, she studied him, trying to read if this was desperation or certainty. "You'd risk everything." He didn't blink. "Already did." Sora stirred then, her small voice breaking through the tension. "Is it morning?" "Almost," Aurea said, smoothing the girl's hair. "Are we still safe?" Darren crouched, meeting her eye level. "You are. That's my job now." Sora nodded solemnly, as if signing a contract she understood. "Okay." Aurea's throat tightened at that single word. After breakfast, tuber mash and filtered water from the dome's emergency stores, Darren began preparing the move. He tore an old fabric sheet into strips to wrap around Aurea's hair and face, dulling her bright skin tone, and adjusted a worn maintenance coat to fit her shoulders. The sleeves hung long, but it would pass a glance. "This won't hold under inspection," she said. "I'm not planning on getting inspected," Darren replied, pulling on his own coat. "We'll move during shift rotation. The service tunnels will be quiet." She hesitated. "And if someone stops us?" "Then I do what I was trained for," he said simply. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment. "You've done this kind of thing before, haven't you?" He looked away. "Too many times." They left the dome at mid-morning. The storm had thinned to a soft drift of snow that swirled around their legs. Darren led, Sora tucked against his chest in the same cloak as before, Aurea walking close behind. The world was colorless, gray sky, white ground, the faint blue shimmer of the habitat rising ahead like a wall of glass. Every few meters, Darren paused, scanning for movement. The outpost drones were grounded after the storm, but patrols would resume soon. They moved fast, staying low, following a narrow drainage trench that ran parallel to the maintenance line. When they reached the eastern access port, Darren stopped and crouched beside the lock panel. "This one's off the main grid," he said. "Service code's outdated. Should open without triggering the logs." He entered the code from memory. The light flickered once, then turned green. The hatch slid open with a quiet hiss. Inside, the tunnel smelled of oil and heat. Narrow pipes lined both sides, hissing softly. The temperature difference hit instantly. Warm air, filtered and dry. Sora clung to him tighter. Aurea followed silently, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow. They walked for several minutes, their footsteps echoing faintly. Darren finally stopped at a sealed bulkhead marked Maintenance Storage. Authorized personnel only. He keyed in a second code, slower this time, glancing up at the small surveillance lens above the door. It stayed dark. No feed, no signal. Perfect. When the door opened, the space beyond was small but clean, a storage bay lined with crates and used equipment and an inactive heat unit in the corner. Darren stepped inside first, scanning the corners out of habit, then gestured for Aurea to follow. "This will work," he said. "No patrols come this deep. You can stay here until I find something more permanent." Aurea's voice was low. "And you? I'll check in during my shifts. Bring supplies. Keep the logs clean." Sora wandered toward one of the crates, running her hand along the metal edge. "It's warm," she said, surprised. Darren smiled faintly. "Better than snow, right?" She nodded. "It smells weird." "Smells like safety," he said. That made her giggle. Even Aurea's mouth twitched, just for a second. He busied himself connecting the heat unit to a nearby vent line. As he worked, Aurea knelt beside him, holding a cable steady while he attached the conduit. Their hands brushed once, briefly. Both froze, aware of the contact, neither pulling away. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked quietly. He tightened the bolt. "I told you." "No, you told me the reason you say out loud." Her tone softened. "What's the real one?" He exhaled slowly. "Because every time I walk away from someone who needs help, I see the ones I couldn't save. Faces don't fade just because you want them to." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, saying nothing. When the heater came online, the air filled with a low hum and steady warmth. Sora settled on the floor beside the vent, tracing shapes in the dust. The small room felt less like a hiding spot and more like the first hint of stability they'd had in weeks. "You'll have to stay quiet," Darren said. "If anyone comes through here, pretend it's abandoned." Aurea's eyes met his. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," he admitted. "But I've lived worse." He stood, brushing off his gloves. "I need to go before shift change. If I don't clock in, they'll flag my absence." Aurea's jaw tightened. "And if they ask where you've been?" "I'll tell them I was recalibrating external sensors. They never double-check field logs." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the faint metallic scent of her skin. "You're lying for us now." "Already did," he said. "Might as well keep going." Something in his calmness disarmed her. She reached up, fingers brushing the edge of his collar. "I used to believe humans only helped when they wanted something in return," she said. He held her gaze, voice low. "Then I guess I'm breaking the rule." Sora's voice cut through the moment. "Mama, look, light bugs." She'd found a handful of tiny luminescent motes drifting from a vent. The soft glow filled the space like floating sparks. Aurea turned toward her daughter, smiling for the first time without hesitation. "They like you," she said. "Because we're warm now," Sora replied. Darren watched them both, the small girl chasing the drifting lights, the woman who'd forgotten how to smile until now, and felt something heavy lift from his chest. "I'll come back tonight," he said quietly. "Lock the door behind me when I leave." As he reached for the hatch, Aurea stopped him with a quiet voice. "Darren, if they find out, what happens to you?" He looked back at her. "Doesn't matter. You'll be safe." "It matters to me," she said, barely above a whisper. For the first time, he didn't have an answer ready. He just looked at her, long enough for silence to fill what words couldn't, and then nodded once before stepping out. The hatch sealed behind him, leaving the soft hum of the heater and Sora's faint laughter echoing through the maintenance bay. For the first time in a long time, Darren didn't feel like he was walking away from a battlefield. He was walking toward something fragile, uncertain, but worth every risk. Darren returned under the cover of shift change, just as the habitat lights dimmed to simulate evening. The corridors were quiet now, sterile white walls reflecting the low, amber glow of night mode. His footsteps were soundless, his ID badge clipped low to keep the light from flashing. He carried a food pack, 2 sealed nutrient cans, and a folded blanket tucked under his arm. The maintenance tunnels were colder than he remembered. Every few steps, steam hissed from a vent and echoed through the narrow space. He moved quickly, counting turns by memory until he reached the storage bay. His pulse steadied when the lock light flickered green. He entered without sound. Inside, the air was warm, soft with the hum of the heater he'd installed. The metallic tang of recycled air mixed with something faintly sweet. Aurea must have cooked. Sora was curled up on a folded blanket near the vent, asleep, her pale hair catching the orange glow. Aurea sat nearby, cross-legged, her back straight even in rest. Her coat had slipped down one shoulder, revealing the shimmer of her blue skin beneath. She looked up when she heard him. "You're late," she said, but her voice lacked any accusation. "Had to pass a checkpoint," Darren replied, setting the supplies down. "They're running thermal scans again, probably looking for heat leaks from the outer domes." Her expression tightened. "Do they suspect something?" "Not yet, but the patrol routes have changed. We need to stay quiet for the next few days." She nodded, her gaze steady. "We can be quiet." He unpacked the food and set it near the heater. The warmth brushed against his face like real air for once, not the filtered cold that filled the rest of the outpost. For a moment, it almost felt like a home. Aurea poured water into a small pot. "You risk too much coming here this often." "I know. Then why do it?" He met her eyes. "Because if I don't, this place starts to feel like the rest of them, cold, empty, not worth saving." Her hands paused over the pot. She looked at him for a long second, something unspoken flickering between them. "You don't talk like a soldier anymore." "I stopped being one today. I stopped following orders," he said. "Now I just try to keep people alive." She tilted her head slightly. "And what keeps you alive, Darren Cole?" He gave a small, humorless laugh. "This, right here." Sora stirred at the sound of their voices, blinking sleepily. "You came back," she said, her voice thick with drowsiness. "I said I would," he replied softly. Aurea smiled faintly, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair. "She waits for you every night now. It's the first thing she asks when she wakes up." Darren's throat tightened a little at that. "I'm not much to wait for." "She disagrees," Aurea said, a trace of warmth in her voice. He knelt beside the heater, checking the connection, mostly to keep his hands busy. "How's the power holding?" "Stable," she said. "Your wiring hasn't failed yet." "Good. It won't." He stood, pulling off his gloves, flexing his fingers to bring back warmth. They ate together in near silence, sharing one of the nutrient cans between them, with Sora sitting cross-legged and listening to their conversation like it was a story. The light inside the room was soft, flickering slightly every few minutes as the heat system cycled. After they ate, Aurea sat back, resting her elbows on her knees. "When I worked in the Lethari labs, we built filtration systems for colonies like this one. We thought we were saving lives. But once the contract shifted, they cut us off. We built machines that would outlive us, and then they threw us away." Darren leaned against a crate, arms folded. "Sounds like the military. They only need you until they don't." She nodded, her eyes distant. "It's strange. When I see Sora asleep like this, I can almost forget how fragile everything is. I want her to believe there's more than survival." "There can be," he said. "Not here." He shook his head. "It doesn't matter where you are. What matters is who you're with." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer. "You really believe that? I wouldn't still be here if I didn't." Silence followed, but it wasn't heavy. The heater's low hum filled it. The air carried the quiet rhythm of safety. Sora yawned and climbed into Aurea's lap. "Tell a story," she murmured. Aurea looked to Darren. "She means you." Darren blinked. "Me?" "She says your stories sound real," Aurea said, half smiling. "Not like mine." He hesitated, then sighed. "All right." He leaned back, thinking for a moment. Once, a long time ago, a man was sent to map the edges of a storm. His ship broke, and everyone else left him behind. The man built a shelter out of what was left, waited for the wind to stop. But it never did. Sora's eyes widened. Did he die? Darren shook his head. No. One day, he saw a light in the storm, a small, flickering one. Someone else was out there, surviving too. He walked toward it, even though he didn't know who it was or what would happen. And that's how the storm ended. Not because the wind stopped, but because he wasn't alone anymore. Sora smiled faintly. That's a good story. Aurea's voice was quiet. That's not a story, is it? Darren looked at her. Maybe not. They sat in silence after that, the heater crackling faintly. Sora drifted off again, her small hand still resting on Aurea's leg. Aurea's eyes stayed on Darren, studying him with that same focused intensity she had when she was mending or fixing things, like she was trying to understand something too big to name. You keep risking yourself, she said finally. Sooner or later, someone will notice. I'll handle it. Don't say that like it's simple. It's not, he admitted, but I've made my choice. And if they catch you? He shrugged slightly. Then at least I did something worth being caught for. Aurea looked down, her voice softer now. You shouldn't say things like that. Not when my daughter can hear. She's asleep, he said quietly, and she should know the truth. The world doesn't get better because we hide from it. Her lips pressed together, but she didn't argue. Instead, she reached up and tucked a strand of white hair behind her ear, her hand trembling slightly. Sometimes, she said, I think you came here to save us. But other times, I think you came here because you needed saving too. Darren looked at her for a long moment. Maybe both can be true. The lights flickered again, dimming to a soft pulse. Aurea moved closer, her face half lit by the orange glow. You can stay tonight, she said quietly. It's safer than walking back in the dark. He hesitated, then nodded once. All right. He sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth from her body. Neither spoke for a while. The air inside the maintenance bay felt still, calm, human. Sora murmured in her sleep, and Aurea rested her hand gently on her daughter's back. You said once you stopped following orders, she said after a while. If not orders, what do you follow now? Darren thought about it. His voice came out low, steady. Instinct. Conscience. Whatever keeps people like you and her alive. And what keeps you alive? He looked at her. Right now? You. She blinked, startled. Then her eyes softened, and she leaned slightly closer. The space between them narrowed, quiet, deliberate. Her hand brushed his. A small, real touch, unforced, uncalculated. He didn't pull away. Outside, the ridge winds howled faintly, muffled by steel and distance. Inside, two people who had spent their lives running from trust sat side by side, letting silence do what words couldn't. When the lights finally dimmed to black, Darren didn't move away. Neither did she. Sora's soft breathing filled the small room, steady and peaceful. For the first time since the storm began, Darren slept without waking once, because for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man on watch. He felt like someone who had found a place worth guarding. The next morning began in quiet amber light. The heater still hummed, steady and reliable, casting faint ripples of warmth across the narrow room. Darren woke slowly, his head resting against the wall, his arm curled protectively around Sora, who had somehow ended up sleeping between him and Aurea during the night. For a long minute, he just stayed there, listening to her small, even breaths, watching the way Aurea's fingers rested lightly on her daughter's back, as if afraid she'd vanish the moment she looked away. The air smelled faintly of metal and boiled grain. Somewhere inside the wall, steam hissed softly through the pipes. It was one of those rare, fragile moments when nothing hurt and no one had to move. Aurea stirred first. She opened her eyes, blinking against the dim light. When she realized how close he was, her breath caught for half a second, but she didn't pull away. Her voice came low, still rough from sleep. You stayed. Darren's answer was quiet. You asked me to. I didn't think you would. He smiled faintly. I don't do things halfway. For a while, neither of them moved. Then Sora woke with a soft murmur, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. Is it still morning? She asked. Barely, Darren said, but I think it's a good one. The The little girl leaned against him without hesitation, head resting on his chest. The small weight felt heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried. He met Aurea's eyes across the child's shoulder. For the first time since he'd met her, she didn't look wary. There was something steadier there now, trust, maybe, or something like it. They ate breakfast slowly, sharing the last of the nutrient packs, and water warmed in the small pot. When Sora finished, she curled back up near the heater, playing with the glow capsule Darren had given her days ago. The light flickered faintly across her face, soft and alive. Aurea leaned back against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. "She laughs again," she said quietly. "That's your doing." Darren shook his head. "No, she just needed someone to give her permission." Her eyes softened. "And what about me?" "You don't need permission either," he said. "You just forgot you had choices." She looked away, her voice quieter. "I forgot what safety felt like." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached across the small space between them, his hand brushing hers. Her fingers froze for a moment, then turned slightly, letting his hand close around them. That silence, simple, human, without words, said everything that needed to be said. They stayed like that for several minutes before the sound of footsteps echoed faintly from the tunnel outside. Darren straightened instantly, all warmth replaced by trained focus. He held a finger to his lips, signaling Aurea to stay quiet. The steps came closer, measured, deliberate, and stopped outside the hatch. Sora noticed a shift in air and looked up, wide-eyed. Aurea pulled her close, shielding her without moving too fast. Darren moved toward the door, every motion silent, precise. He positioned himself beside the frame, weapon drawn from under his coat. His pulse slowed to a soldier's rhythm. He waited. A knock came, 3 soft taps. Then a voice he recognized. "Cole? You in there?" He exhaled slowly. It was Heron, the only person in maintenance who'd worked beside him long enough to know when something was off. Darren holstered the weapon and opened the hatch halfway. "What are you doing down here?" Heron's brow furrowed. He was older, grizzled, carrying a data tablet under one arm. "Looking for you." The storm logs showed a thermal anomaly. "They think someone's rerouted power lines." "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Darren kept his tone casual. "Maybe the dome heaters glitched. I'll check it out later." "Do that," Heron said. He glanced past Darren's shoulder, eyes narrowing. "What's this room? I thought Storage 12 was decommissioned." Darren stepped subtly into the man's line of sight, blocking the view. "It is. I'm recalibrating it for sensor testing. Nothing here you need to worry about." Heron studied him for a long second, suspicion flickering but not solidifying. "You've been working too many double shifts, Cole. You look like hell." "I'm fine, right?" Heron gave a dry snort. "You always say that." He hesitated at the door. "Command sending new inspectors down tomorrow. They'll be checking energy flow manually. If you got something running off record," his gaze lingered. "You'll want to shut it down before they do." Darren's jaw tightened. "Understood." Heron nodded once, turned, and walked away. Darren waited until the footsteps faded completely before closing the hatch and turning back. Aurea was standing now, her face pale. "What did he mean?" "Inspections," Darren said. "They'll be here tomorrow. We can't stay." Her breath hitched. "Then where do we go?" He ran a hand through his hair, thinking. "There's a service conduit that runs behind the Hydro Division. Low surveillance. We can move through it after the night shift starts. I'll bring uniforms. You'll blend in for a while." She shook her head. "You're talking about hiding forever." "I'm talking about staying alive," he said firmly. Her voice rose, raw. "And what then, Darren? We just keep running? Keep waiting for someone else to find us?" He looked at her, steady. "Until I find somewhere they can't." She pressed a hand to her forehead, pacing. "You don't even know what you're fighting anymore." "I do," he said quietly. "I'm fighting for the right to care about someone without it being illegal." The words hung in the air. Even Sora went still. Aurea turned toward him, her expression torn between anger and something deeper. "You talk like you've already decided your life isn't worth as much as ours." He stepped closer. "You're wrong. This," he gestured to the small room, the heater, the child curled under the blanket. "This is the first thing in years that has made my life worth something." She froze, her breath catching. You mean that? He nodded. Her voice dropped, barely above a whisper, then stopped, planning to disappear. That broke something in him, a restraint, maybe, or fear. He stepped forward, closing the space between them. She didn't back away. His hand came up, tracing the side of her face gently, the warmth of her skin startling against the cold air. You said once you didn't dream anymore, he said softly. Maybe it's time you start again. Her hand rose, resting against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath. And if we get caught, then at least we live the way we wanted. She didn't answer with words. She leaned in, pressing her forehead against his, eyes closed, breath trembling. For a long moment, neither moved. The room seemed to hold its breath with them. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed. The fear was still there, but it was layered with something stronger, resolve. If we go, she said, we go together. No more hiding behind orders or plans. He nodded. Together. Sora's small voice broke the stillness. Are we going somewhere new? Aurea knelt, pulling her daughter into her arms. Yes, love, she whispered. Somewhere brighter. Darren crouched beside them, his hand resting on the child's shoulder. And warmer, he added with a faint smile. That night, while the habitat above hummed in perfect, sterile order, 3 figures prepared quietly in the dim light of an unused maintenance bay. A man who'd once followed every command, a woman who'd learned never to trust one, and a child who had learned how to hope again. When the time came, Darren sealed the hatch behind them, erasing every trace they'd been there. The heater's hum faded into silence. As they stepped into the dark tunnel, Aurea reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. For the first time since the cold had begun, Kyrian Ridge didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a path. They walked together through the narrow corridor, 3 shadows moving toward a future no one had planned, but one that finally belonged to them. And as the dome lights flickered far above, the snow began to fall again, slow and quiet, covering the ridge in white. Not erasing, just cleansing.